Happy Friday, everyone. This is Dr. McClellan with Athenaze Chapter 3. You should have access to this PowerPoint as a PDF on Blackboard, so I encourage you at the beginning of this lecture, if you want to, if you have a printer to print it out, use it to follow along, to take notes as we're going through this lecture, because I'll be referring to things that are on the screen in front of you, so you can either use your notebook, the PowerPoints, or whatever you have available to you. So, getting on with Chapter 3, we're going to be reviewing a lot of stuff that I went over in the last PowerPoint, and with verbs, which are going to be the first important thing we go over, keep in mind the 5 things that you have to identify for any verb. If I see any Greek verb in front of me, I'm going to look for the person and number, which you can see there in the box, whether it's first person, I or we, second person, you or y'all, or third person, he, she, or it for the singular, or they for the plural, and then I have to figure out if it's singular or plural. Is it one person or many? Is it I or we, you or y'all, he, she, it, or they? That should be pretty familiar by now. You guys are doing a good job identifying that in class. The next piece of information I'll need is tense, typically when an action occurs, as well as how complete it is, which will be clearer later. The mood we talked about last time. So far you've seen 2 moods this semester. The indicative, when I use to indicate facts taking place, as you saw in the last PowerPoint, along with the imperative, which is used to give commands in Greek, when I just add an epsilon to the end of a stem, which we'll see on the next slide. And then finally, this won't be important for a while, but we will also need to look for the voice of the verb, whether it's active, like I hit the ball, if I'm actively hitting, the passive voice, which will eventually be used for phrases like I am hit or I've been seen. I'm not really doing anything, but something is happening to me in those sentences. And the very strange middle voice, which is unique to Greek, where you either have a reflexive action or an action that benefits the speaker. So I hit myself with the ball is a kind of simple example of that. Not that we would say that necessarily in English. So a lot of what we're covering in Chapter 3 mostly reviews some of the stuff that's in the last PowerPoint. So some of this will probably look familiar to you from last time if you looked through the previous lecture. But just to review here, anytime I look at a Greek verb, I always have to look at the end to see who's performing an action. So let's use a different verb that we're going to see a lot this semester, akuo. Akuo, which means I hear or I listen. It's the root for acoustics, so it's a very easy verb to remember if you have it in your flashcards. Akuo, I hear or listen. So if you follow along with the chart here, you can see that the points in red in that box are what I look for to figure out who's hearing or who's listening. So the first person singular akuo with that omega at the end, that tells me that it's I. It's a first person singular ending, so I translate it as I hear or listen, akuo. Second person singular, akues, that ace ending tells me it's you and just one person here, so one person, you, hear or listen. Akue is third person singular, that means he, she, or it, one person only. This is still in the singular column, hears or listens, akue. On the right side are all the plurals. The plural of I is we, right? If I'm moving from just talking about myself to talking about a group, but I'm still speaking for us, I say we hear or listen. Aku amen. Amen is the ending I will see for we at the end of a verb in the present tense. So, aku amen, we hear or listen. Second person plural, akuete, y'all hear or listen, akuete. And finally, they, the very easy to hear, akuusi, akuusi. Notice there's that diphthong back to back, oo, that goes back to back in the pronunciation. Akuusi, usin or usi is the ending for they, third person plural in ancient Greek. In addition to those, you will also need to know from this chapter, now that they're being formally introduced to you, the way to make commands in Greek with the imperative mood. And remember, the imperative is a different mood from the indicative because just because I tell you, for example, akue, listen to this lecture, it doesn't mean you necessarily are. Maybe you're listening to Eminem's new album, or maybe you're playing something else in the background. You're not really listening to me. Maybe you're watching football this weekend, and maybe you're just not paying too close attention, so it's not real. You're not actually listening necessarily, although I hope you are. But that's why imperatives take on a different mood in Greek. They're a little less real than an indicative verb that says, hey, you are, in fact, listening. So, that technical stuff out of the way I tell someone to do something in Greek is to use the same verb stem, aku, but I just add epsilon to the end. So you can see in the box in the bottom left, akue, hear, listen, one person only. That's the singular version. But if I'm talking to all of you, if I want to give all of you a command, I'm going to borrow the same ending as the second person plural and say akuete, all of you, listen. So that can be tricky. Sometimes you will see a sentence where you have a plural, akuete, and you have to pay attention and decide which one makes more sense. Is the sentence giving a command, or is it someone just simply saying, hey, you are all, in fact, listening? And sometimes that can be tricky, but you have to use context to figure that out. And that's the fun of ancient Greek. It's always kind of like a puzzle. The other form we're going to talk about this chapter that we will see in the readings is the infinitive. The infinitive is a little bit tricky, but all you really need to know right now is that you translate the infinitive with the phrase to blank. So akuein, the ending for an infinitive is ein, epsilon, iota, nu, like ein. Akuein means to hear or to listen. For now, just think of the infinitive as a dictionary entry. When you look up a word like to run, to hit, to swim, you'll often see that as kind of the standard entry in an English dictionary for how that verb is translated. So for now, think of the infinitive that way. We'll talk more about infinitives later, but that's how you really translate them for the get-go, and we'll explain more a bit later in class. The other thing we talked about in the last lecture that you will also need to be comfortable with at the end of chapter 3 are the epsilon contract verbs. There are some verbs that end not with a regular strong vowel like we saw with akuo, or with a consonant like lepo, which you get in this chapter, but end with weak vowels like epsilon or alpha or omicron. Epsilon is very weak, like we saw last time, and if you go back to the last lecture, you will see a couple slides that explain some of the contraction rules, which you can see on the left side of the screen, when epsilon runs into different endings. If you know those formulas that you see on the left side of the screen, everything that you see in the box on the right makes perfect sense. It's just a matter of knowing the rules and how to combine the different sounds. So for instance, if I want to use the verb theoreo, which means I watch or I look at, it's the root for theory or something like that. When I say I watch, I'm going to start with theore, my stem, add omega for I, and as you can see at the bottom of the left-hand side, epsilon and omega gives me a longer omega. That's not too difficult, so I would say theoro, I watch. Same thing's going to happen in the second person singular. Theores is just simply epsilon at the end of theore running into eis. So if you see the second entry down on the left, epsilon plus that diphthong a gives me just a longer a. So think of Fonzie, for example. Theores, you watch. Theore, he, she, it watches. That's the same combination, epsilon plus a. Theorumen, we watch. What happened there? Well, the ending normally, like you saw on the last slide, is amen, just an omicron before men. When that omicron runs into epsilon, if you look on the left side of the screen, 3 entries down, epsilon plus omicron gives you oo, omicron upsilon. They combine to a different sound. So this is really important when you have an epsilon contract verb to remember those combination rules. So not theoreamen, but theorumen. Theorumen, we watch. The next one down, theorete, y'all watch, is just from ete, normal y'all ending, with epsilon. Epsilon plus epsilon gives us a. That's something that's on the top of the left-hand side. And finally, when usi runs into that epsilon, you just get a longer oo, as you can see in the second to last entry on the left. So we just simply have theorusi, they watch. So that's pretty straightforward. If you can remember those formulas on the left, it's very easy to form epsilon contract verbs. There's really not a whole lot to them other than remembering those rules and tacking on the right endings. They can provide some confusion when you get to things like the imperatives. When you have the stem theore, to watch, and you just add an epsilon to give one person a command to say, hey, you, watch this, you end up with epsilon plus epsilon giving you a. So in fact, the command, hey, you, watch this, looks very similar to the third person singular, theore, watch. The only difference between them, as you can see if you look very carefully, is the accent on it, because two epsilons give you a short A, so a command would sound like this: theore, theore, watch. Whereas if I want to say he, she, or it is watching, if you look back at the chart on the bottom left-hand side, you can see there's a circumflex over it. When an ancient Greek would say, hey, that person is watching something, they would stretch that pronunciation out to make it sound different from the command. So they would say, theore, theore, he, she, or it is watching, instead of theore, hey, you, watch this. So it's a slight difference, but it makes all the difference in the world in how you translate it. To make a plural command, it's going to be the same thing. You borrow the second person plural for y'all are watching and just use the same form, theorete. So then again, you're also going to use context to figure out if you have a command or just a simple indicative verb. And then finally, for the infinitives, to say to watch something, I'm just going to have theorein, just like before. Epsilon with A gives me a longer A. So that should be pretty straightforward, but you want to make sure that you're practicing forming these epsilon contract verbs. What I recommend for studying is that you sit down with a different verb from one of these chapters and just go through one entry after another. What happens if I take away the stem and add the different endings? What are they going to turn out to be? And we'll do some practicing with this in class on Monday as well. So that's pretty much it for verbs. And again, that should be pretty familiar from the last lecture. I want to spend a bit more time today talking about nouns and declensions in particular. We talked about this concept last time, and that was when we were introducing a lot of new concepts. So just to review, when we look at Greek nouns, there are three different declensions, or basically patterns or sounds of endings that they fall into, kind of different umbrellas. For now, we're just going to worry about the second declension, which I'm going to walk through today, which I actually talked about last time as well, where we mostly find masculine and neuter nouns. There's no particular reason why that is. That's just kind of a happenstance of ancient Greek language. There's a kind of broader linguistic explanation that we don't really need to get into. But the second declension, you just have to remember, has nouns with stems ending in an O sound, typically with omicron at the ending. We'll eventually see the first declension in the next chapter has mostly feminine nouns with stems ending in alpha or eta, a different sound to them, whereas the third declension, which is a bit trickier, has all the genders and has stems ending in consonants. That's basically the main definition for all three declensions, or patterns of endings that Greek nouns fall into. Fortunately, the second declension is pretty straightforward. So let's take an example from some of the readings that you'll come across. The word for a chorus or dance is choros, choru, ha. And I want to pause here to look at that entry in the red at the top. Typically, if you look in a Greek dictionary, if some of you bought the LSJ that I mentioned, the big Greek dictionary that you'll eventually use when you're reading Plato or Homer or anything else by the third semester, you're often going to find nouns classified that way in a dictionary. What that's basically showing you is three pieces of information that are very important. The first one, the choros entry, is the nominative singular. That's for the chorus. And you can see in the top left, the nominative singular of chorus is ha choros. The second full entry you get in the top red is the genitive singular, choru, choru. So there, I know to change the definite article to match it. So to choru, of the chorus, is how I typically translate genitives. The third piece of information I get with a noun in a dictionary is the definite article with it, ha in this case. And that's very important because that ha tells me that choros, choru is masculine, which is why you have the masculine review up at the top. So make sure you're paying very close attention to your dictionary entries as you start to add to your flashcards. I recommend that you follow this format. And sometimes Athenaze will break from it, but I recommend this format because it gives you all the information you need. It tells you its second declension because you can see what the genitive looks like. You get the first two forms. And it also tells you the gender, which is going to be very important when we want to add adjectives to describe the chorus, which we'll see a little bit later. But for now, let's just look at the endings of this. Depending on the ending, just like with verbs, the endings of nouns tell me how they work in the sentence. The genitive case, like we saw below, to choru, is usually used to say of something. The genitive is often used for possession or origin. things that we'll start to see a little bit later along with other prepositions, but for now, 90% of the time when you see a genitive, you can usually translate it with of. So to koru will probably mean something like of the chorus, belonging to the chorus, to koru, that second entry. The third entry, the dative, notice very carefully that both omegas have an iota subscript underneath them. So you can either pronounce this as toi koroi if you want to, or most people, and myself included, drop that iota out of the pronunciation and just say to koro, to koro. The dative is used to say to or for something because that's an indirect object. So to or for is usually how we'll translate a dative by itself in a sentence. To koro, to or for the chorus. You guys have already seen the accusative a bunch of times in our reading, ending with nu. The ending here that we want to look at is ton koron, which just means the chorus when it's the direct object, if I hit the chorus or if I see the chorus or something like that. But if I want to talk to the chorus, I'm going to change the ending to epsilon. O core, I might shout out. O chorus, maybe sing again, something like that. Plurals, let's just go through them really quickly. You've seen some of these before. If it's not just one chorus, but more than one choruses, that's the subject of a sentence, I'll change the article and the ending to hoi koroi, the choruses, hoi koroi. The genitive plural is ton koron of the choruses. That tone ending is very common for genitive plural, as we'll see later. Dative plural, tois korois, to or for the choruses. And the always fun to say accusative plural, tous chorus, the choruses, if I hit or see the choruses. And finally, if I'm talking to a bunch of choruses, the vocative plural is almost always the same as the nominative plural. So I would just say, o choroi, o choruses. So that's the masculine system in the second declension. Neuter nouns, you may remember, work a little bit differently, but they follow a similar pattern. They all kind of have that O sound in the ending, which makes them second declension. But the endings will be slightly different, as will the definite articles. So let's take tree, which is one of the nouns we saw before. The nominative, the accusative, are all going to be the same. Ta dendron, the tree in this case. To dendru, the genitive singular, to dendru, of the tree, just like the masculine. To dendro, or toi dendroi if you prefer, to or for the tree in the dative singular. Remember that neuter nouns always copy the nominative and the accusative. They are always, always, always going to be the same. And the vocative happens to borrow that ending as well. So if I talked to a tree and went really crazy, I'd say, o dendron, o tree. Let's go through the plurals on the right side. Very commonly, neuter plurals are going to end in alpha. That's just a fairly common pattern that we see in ancient Greek. So if I see ta dendra, I know I have more than one tree as my subject. Ta dendra, the trees. Genitive plural is the same, ton dendron, of the trees. Tois dendrois is the dative plural form, just like the masculine. Tois dendrois, to or for the trees. And finally, remember, the accusative is always going to be the same as the nominative. That's a special rule for neuter nouns. Ta dendra, the trees. And if I really go crazy and start walking around campus and talk to trees, I would probably say, o dendra, o trees. So, as you probably noticed in both of these charts, all of the definite articles, the words for the, have changed along with the cases. And that's because, as you probably remember, all the definite articles have to match their nouns in gender, number, and case. I want you to remember that list very carefully. Gender, number, case. Because if we take, for example, the masculine definite articles, you can see in this chart here, which you will want to start memorizing this week, all the different possibilities for a masculine definite article. Fortunately, they often sound a lot like the second declension endings, for example, tu dendru or tu koru, like we saw before. So they're pretty easy to remember right now, but you really do want to spend some time memorizing this chart as soon as possible because this is going to be very important for the rest of the semester. So for now, I just want you to worry about the forms in blue the masculine in the singular and plural from ha, tu, to, ton, o, singular. Hoi, ton, tois, tus, o, plural. You can almost make a song out of it if you want to. That's what I used to do when I memorized these. The neuter in the nice magenta color, ta, tu, to, ta, o, then the singular, and plural, ta, ton, tois, ta, o. Again, if you want to make a song out of it, that might help you remember them, but those are the ones that you'll want to pay attention to for this chapter, and eventually next chapter we'll fill in the chart with the feminine forms that you see there. So, remember, when you're looking at a Greek noun and those entries, you're going to want to pay attention to gender, number, and case. Because as you change all the definite articles, like with ha, chronos, time, you're going to want to make sure that you pay attention to the gender. Where am I going to find the gender? Well, the key to gender is looking at the definite article in the dictionary entry. You just have to memorize that in order to know what gender the noun is. So if I take a look on this chart, that's where I find the gender, where that ha is located next to chronos and chronou. That tells me it's masculine. If you remember from that chart before, I only get ha in the masculine gender. How am I going to tell the case? Well, I'm going to look over on the left side of the chart, the nominative, genitive, dative, and so forth, and I have to change the gender of that definite article to match the noun. So if I go to the dative for time, to chrono, I'm going to make sure the definite article matches it. I can't say ha chrono, they don't match each other. I have to make it match gender, case, and number. Number's pretty straightforward. Is it singular or plural? I'm also going to change the definite article to go with that as well. But as long as I have all three pieces of information, I can fill in this chart. So it should be pretty straightforward, and fortunately with the second declension, they typically rhyme. When we get to the feminine gender in the first declension, this is not a noun you need to memorize. This is looking ahead to chapter 4. We will have to change things around. So let's just look ahead to a word for water jar or water jug, hudria. Hudria, which has a genitive hudrias. And notice that its definite article is a totally different vowel, he. So when you make this flashcard later, you will know just from that definite article, he, that the gender is feminine. It's different this time. But once again, as long as I know what case I'm going in, I know how to change the different endings. So for example, I'll go from he hudria for the water jug as my subject in the nominative singular to, for example, the accusative singular tain hudrion. That's the accusative ending for water jug in the first declension next chapter. And I can change the number to the plural by saying hai hudriai for the nominative plural, the water jugs, or tais hudriais in the dative, and so forth. So remember those three things, gender, number, and case, are going to be your best friends this semester. Same thing for other nouns that sometimes fall in different patterns. Ha poietes, tu poietu, the poet, is going to be another noun we learn in the next few chapters. But again, as long as I know it's masculine by looking at the gender, there I know that from the ha up top, and I follow the cases to change the different endings, so I'll go from ha to, ton, o, because this is a masculine noun, even though it's not following the second declension endings. We'll learn about poietes later. And I know to change it by number, I can always follow the right endings. That's how I can determine the right use of the definite article. Gender, number, and case is the list you want to remember. Okay, so case in point, this is just like with adjectives. So we saw this chart before with words like ha dikaiopoulos sophos versus ton dikaiopoulos sophon. Articles, adjectives, and nouns always have to agree on those three qualities: case, number, gender, gender, number, case. Okay, so what typically you're going to see for an adjective is a chart like this one, because since I want to be able to describe anything as, for example, beautiful or fine, maybe I'm talking about a man, a woman, a child, a thing, a rock I saw somewhere, a swan, who knows what the case may be. I want to be able to move between all the different genders, singular and plural, and all the different cases to describe something, because I could have a single masculine thing, I could have many neuter things, I could have a single female thing that I want to describe as beautiful, or plural. It doesn't matter, but I need an adjective to move between those things. So oftentimes when I see adjectives in a dictionary, they will appear like you see up at the top there with three forms: kalos, kale, kalon. That's basically telling you the masculine, feminine, and neuter forms in the singular for that adjective. And notice if you look in the singular half of this chart, in the nominative for masculine, feminine, and neuter, you have kalos, kale, kalon. That's how I say beautiful for a subject in those three genders. Now, don't worry about the feminine for now. This is kind of looking ahead a little bit. I just want you to have this for reference. But once I know how an adjective forms, in this case, kalos, kale, kalon follows first and second declension endings, I can fill in a chart like this one to say all the different possibilities for this adjective. So for example, if I'm talking about a beautiful chorus, a masculine noun, I'm going to use all the forms in blue. Kalos, kalu, kalo, kalon, kaloi, kalon, kalois, kalus, everything in blue that you just saw. But if I'm talking about a tree and it's beautiful, I'm going to use the magenta forms because it's neuter. I have to change the gender to match the noun. So I'll instead say kalon, kalu, kalo, kalon, kala, kalon, kalois, kala, etc., etc. So for example, if I'm talking about the beautiful tree, if I want to put all these three things together, let's say I want to match dendron, tree, with the article or with the adjective beautiful. So I know that dendron, tree, is neuter because of that ta at the top there. That tells me it's a neuter noun. So I'm going to just start by putting all the different definite articles down. Ta, tu, to, ta, o, ta, ton, tois, ta, o. I'm done. I know which definite articles I need to use for all the cases and both numbers. Then I can just go through and add dendron, dendron, dendru, dendro, dendron, dendron, a, on, ois, a. Pretty straightforward. And from there, all I need to know is which gender of that adjective, beautiful, I need to use. Well, because it's a neuter noun, I'm going to start with a third column, kalon. Go back to that chart before if you're not quite sure why. I want to use the right gender here, kalon. And from there, I just have to make it match. Kalon, kalu, kalo, kalon, kalon, kala, kalon, kalois, kala, kala. And all of them match together. So to kalondendron, to kaludendru, to kalodendro, to kalondendron, and so on and so forth. You can see they all match gender, number, and case. The beautiful tree or the beautiful trees, as the case may be. If I change it to the beautiful man, the same principle holds. So let's take the same pattern here. I'm going to use the same adjective, kalos, kale, kalon, but because man, anthropos, is a masculine noun, which I know because the definite article is ha in this case, I'm going to start with the first column, kalos, and its appropriate endings. I'm not going to use the neuter endings from the last one because I want to match the same gender, masculine. So going through this one, if I'm filling in this chart, let's just take anthropos first. I can do anthropos, anthropou, so forth, put in the right endings. I know I need to use ha, tu, to, ton, and those endings for the definite article because it's a gender, masculine gender. And from there, I just have to use the right column of the adjective beautiful. I'm going to use kalos. So going through these, I'm going to say ho kalos anthropos for the beautiful man if he's my subject. Genitive to kalu anthropou is of the beautiful man. To kalo anthropo, to or for the beautiful man. Ton kalon anthropon, the beautiful man if he's my direct object. And o kale anthropeo, beautiful man if I'm talking to him. Plurals. Hoi kaloi anthropoi, the beautiful men. Ton kalon anthropon, of the beautiful men. Remember, the genitive means of something. Dative. Tois kalois anthropois, to or for the beautiful men. Tous kalus anthropous, if the beautiful men are my direct object. And o kaloi anthropoi, o beautiful men, if I'm talking to them directly. So, keep practicing. We'll do some of this in class, matching adjectives to nouns, but the main thing is to remember the rule. Match gender, number, and case, and as long as you can know the endings and go through them in your head, you should be able to match them just like you see on these charts. And it's almost intuitive. They typically rhyme, but we will get to a point where they won't necessarily do this. So don't get wrapped up in the idea of them having to sound the same, because sometimes they won't. But as long as you can remember the rule, gender, number, and case have to match, you're always going to be steering correctly. All right, so let's go through some of the vocabulary for this chapter, which is taking from both alpha and beta, both halves of the chapter. A couple verbs that are important, well, all of them are important here. Meno means I stay or I wait for someone, meno. Pipto, second one down, means I fall, pipto. Proskoreo, a very important word that means I approach or I go towards someone. But when I approach someone in Greek, when I use proskoreo, I put the person or thing I'm approaching in the dative case. So that's going to be really tricky. You have to remember both of those together. Proskoreo plus the dative. I approach that person in the dative case. You'll never see an accusative used with this verb. Facey is the third person singular form of to speak or say, a different form from Lego. Facey or facin means he or she says. We probably won't have a thing speaking, so we can assume it's he or she. Lepo means I leave. Lepo, I leave. And finally, luo, I loosen or untie something. We'll see that there's a lot of unbinding for oxen and stuff in the story. Luo, I loosen. Let's go through some nouns and pronouns. A couple important ones. Halithos, stone. Taudapnon, a neuter noun. Remember, it's neuter, so it's going to look the same in the nominative and the accusative. For dinner, taudapnon. Very important word, pais. Ha or he pais. That's what that division there means. Ha pais or he pais can mean either boy or girl, depending on the gender. So if you see ha pais with the omicron, you know it's masculine, so you can either translate it as child or boy. You can assume it's male. If you see he pais, you can also translate it as child, but that's the feminine nominative singular definite article, so you could translate it as girl. This is going to have a special vocative, as we'll see. The vocative, if I'm talking to a child, I would say o pai, o child, o boy or girl. Hopater is a noun we'll see later. Hopater, it's a root for pater in Latin, is father. The accusative of that looks like ton patera. It's a little different from some of the nouns we've seen. We'll learn about pater a little bit later this semester. And the vocative is o pater, o pater. So you can recognize that one is the accusative and the vocative by the definite articles with them. If I'm talking to one person directly, I could say su. Su is how I say you, singular, and that's the nominative form of you in Greek. Su. Auta is it, if I'm talking about a thing, and auton is the accusative of he, she, or it. Auton means him. If I see him, I see auton in Greek. So let's go through some adjectives. I'm giving you a little bit more information than Athenaze gives you. Typically, adjectives are going to show three forms, the masculine, feminine, and neuter, or they'll shorten it to, for example, should say Andreios, aeon, shouldn't be Andrepios, sorry for the misspelling there. Andreios, just ignore the pi, you'll see it in the book. Andreios aeon, which means Andreas, Andrei, Andreon, means brave, or quite literally, manly, like an aner, an andros. Polloi means many, and it's actually a plural form, so polloi is only used to talk about many, multiple things. Tasutas, tasute, tasuton, aeon, means so great or so many in the plural. Aitios, aeon, means responsible or to blame. Dunatos, aeon, means possible. Dunatos, dunate, dunaton. And a very important adjective that we'll learn a little bit about later, next chapter, megas. Megas means big or large or great. We kind of saw a version of this last chapter. A couple more things to know. Some important adverbs. Meketi. Meketi is an adverb used with a command, only with imperatives. That means don't do this any longer. It's very specific, but you'll see how it relates to some of the other stuff in this list. Meketi, don't blank any longer. Authis, authis means again. Deuro, you saw from the reading today, means here, like el thedero, come here. Deuro, here. Eti means still or yet, and you can see that that's part of the makeup of meketi. Meketi means not still or not any longer, don't do something. Eti means still or still going. Uketi means no longer. It's the negative of eti, so that's the opposite meaning. A couple prepositions. Remember, with prepositions, you have to memorize both the word itself and the case that it goes with. Sometimes different prepositions can take different cases. These are very important ones that you'll see all the time. The preposition en takes the dative and means in something or on something. It can mean both, inside something or on top of something. In or on, en plus the dative. And you can use context to figure out which one makes sense. Its opposite is ek, or sometimes ex. It means the same thing, takes the genitive case and means out of something. We saw this, for example, with ek bino in the readings from chapter 3, or chapter 2, I should say. Ek or ex. The only difference here is that X is the form used before words beginning with vowels, so ek or ex mean the same thing with the genitive. Okay, so that should get you through all of the vocabulary for this chapter. Here's your homework for Monday. I want you guys to prepare reading 3 alpha. We'll be going through that, and we will also be doing exercises 3 alpha and 3 beta, so you should be going through all of those. However, I hinted at this many, many times in class, you have to prepare for your quiz. We had a short week this week, so Monday is when we're going to have our quiz. For this one, very straightforward. You have to memorize the forms of to be in Greek. And here they are. This is the exact chart that I will want you to fill in Greek. If you know these Greek forms, you are all set. I want you to repeat this until you are sick of these forms. To be in the present tense in Greek. Me, I am. A, like we saw today. A, you are. Esti, he, she, or it is, or estin, esti. Plurals, esmen, esmen, we are. Este, y'all are. And asi, or asin, they are. Let me go through those one more time, just in the Greek. Amy, esti, esmen, este, asi. If you can repeat those and memorize those spellings cold, you are good to go. But you're going to see that on your quiz on Monday, so memorize these down, because you're going to see the verb to be so frequently, it's important to have it memorized. And I will see you guys Monday. If you have any questions in the meantime, let me know by email, and don't forget to fill in your weekly review sheets on Blackboard, and I will see you guys fresh, bright, and early on Monday. Take care.